But I want to tell you this good news from down there in Charleston. Emanuel AME Church met Sunday for the first time since that massacre, and with the world watching, it sent the message that love and forgiveness conquer hate.
At an emotional service, the church mourned, prayed, and honored the lives of the members they loved so dearly. Ephraim Graham has a look at the healing that's beginning to take shape.
Sunday worship returned to this Charleston crime scene 4 days after a gunman killed 9 people during Bible study at Mother Emanuel AME. Longtime members prayed for this day, but it's not easy.
These people I knew well. These are fine people. These are all fine people. Four ministers that belong in this church, and they're great people. They are absolutely great people. I will never forget about this day.
Tears give way to worship inside the sanctuary, packed with visitors, parishioners, and politicians.
My uncle went to Emanuel for more than 30 years before his death. So for me, it's a fairly personal experience. I'd say really personal experience in loss.
Tim Scott is the first African-American elected to the Senate from South Carolina and a personal friend of Clemente Pinckney, Emanuel's pastor and a state senator, killed in the massacre.
I'm a Republican, he's a Democrat, but you would not be able to tell there was a difference because when we were together, we weren't talking politics. We weren't talking philosophical dispositions from a political perspective. We talked about his family. We talked about his little girls. We talked about the power of hope, the power of faith, the power of love.
I saw Pastor Clemente's love firsthand 5 years ago at this great gathering of men on a mission to help children in need.
Even those of us who may come from homes where there are no fathers, I think that there are always father figures.
Clemente became that figure for Kyle Green.
It doesn't matter that you're from Ridgeland, this small town,
who grew up in the same hometown with an absent father and a mother on drugs.
How would you describe the relationship between you and Clemente?
He saw something in me that I didn't see in my own self, and that was my potential to be great. And I think unknowingly to me, he poured into it. And so I'm gonna miss that more than anything, his ability to pour into my potential to be great.
A pastor's love is also palpable here outside the church, days after the hate-driven crime.
You feel it in the spontaneous worship that erupts on the street.
It's really moving. You just look around and you see the outpouring of love and support from the community.
Zach and his college buddies came from Manhattan. Pastor Dimas Salaberios traveled from the Bronx.
It helps the healing process when white, black, Asian, Latino begin to come together and say, you know what, we're here to say we're not a part of Dylan's foolishness. We're here to say that we're standing with the church and with their families and those that are hurt.
Pastor Dimas joined 8 ministers from New York and New Jersey, praying with victims' family members.
Let's live out John 13:35, where God said, you know, that the world will know us and know that we're his disciples by our love one towards another.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News, Charleston, South Carolina.
Well, that's a great witness for the entire nation. There's something in effect that's been called the Affordable Care Act. It's known as Obamacare. Within days now, even as we speak, and shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court is going to bring down a ruling as to whether or not the federal subsidies that have been given to people under that CARE Act actually violate the act as it is written. Jonathan Gruber, who wrote the act, said indefinitely there were state exchanges, and that's what it was intended to be. We'll see what happens. But the Wall Street Journal is saying, look, if this thing continues as it's currently going, there's going to be an oligopoly that will be all of the 4 or 5 major health providers are going to be merged together. And so we'll have single payer whether we like it or not, and that will be terrible for the American consumer. Well, John Jessup has more on this story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Thanks, Pat. President Obama's health care law faces a critical ruling at the Supreme Court, and no matter what the outcome, Americans can expect to see more of an impact from Obamacare. Here's George Thomas with the details.
The case before the 9 justices focuses on the legality of subsidies. Challengers want the court to determine whether President Obama's health care law authorizes tax subsidies for millions of Americans. If the court agrees with the opponents, some 6 million people could lose their tax credits to buy health insurance.
If the court were to rule that the administration's interpretation was wrong, then there are 34 states where people would no longer be able to get these tax credits for buying coverage on the exchange.
That means the cost of health insurance could rise again, and depending on the state you live in, premiums could jump by hundreds of dollars per month. Some Republicans say they have legislation to help those who could lose health coverage in case the Supreme Court rules against the administration. Others say if the court strikes down the subsidy, then it's time to repeal Obamacare completely. The Congressional Budget Office says that would actually grow the economy by 0.7% per year. But if Obamacare continues, the Wall Street Journal warns of major consequences for the healthcare industry, including the potential creation of one massive health system one day run by the government. In an editorial titled Obamacare's Oligopoly Wave, the paper says America's 5 largest health insurers are thinking about consolidating into one monster conglomerate, creating oligopolies with the predictable results of higher costs, lower quality, and less innovation.
This is just one more example of a law that has had all sorts of unintended consequences and adverse effects for all sorts of people.
The court is expected to hand down its decision on Obamacare by month's end. George Thomas, CBN News.
Thanks, George. And Pat, any predictions on how the court will rule?
I don't have a clue. I really don't. I think if they got any sense, they'll strike it down, because if they follow the language of the law, it's clear, and the person who was the architect of it said clearly that's what he intended. So they'd have to go against established precedent to uphold that thing. But that's what happens when socialists get their hands on the government and try to impose these crazy schemes. That law was a monstrosity. It should never have passed. It was strictly a Democrat Party operation. There wasn't one Republican who voted for it. And the Speaker of the House said, we've got to pass it to see what's in it. And that's that famous statement out by Nancy Pelosi. They didn't know what was in the law. And they're still trying to find out. It was a huge monstrosity that took about 1/6 of the entire economy of this nation and tried to jam it into a new model, and it's led to chaos and confusion and enormous costs. So the best thing that would happen if the Supreme Court would rule that indeed those state mandates are legal and that what was being done by federal subsidies is not in the law, and then if Congress would go back, strike down the Obamacare and rewrite the thing would make some sense. It's got to be done. Well, there's another ruling that I think is rather strange that came out of Iowa, and Iowa's the heartland, but you'd never know it from this decision. John?
That's right, Pat. Iowa's Supreme Court has reinstated a controversial abortion practice. It allows doctors to give abortion-inducing pills through a video conferencing system without meeting the patient in person. In 2013, the Iowa Board of Medicine ruled doctors must be in the same room with a patient before dispensing the pills. The board cited safety concerns over a required physical examination. Pro-life advocates tell CBN News the practice is dangerous for women, but Iowa's justices unanimously agreed with Planned Parenthood that having a doctor in the room is too much trouble. Iowa is one of 2 states that allows telemed abortions. A United Nations report on last summer's war in Gaza says both Israel and the Palestinians may have committed war crimes. The report says the UN Commission gathered substantial information pointing to serious violations of international human rights law by both sides. Israel launched its offensive last summer in response to heavy rocket fire from Hamas aimed at Israeli civilians. Israel warned Palestinians to evacuate before launching their airstrikes, but they point out Hamas used civilians as human shields. A similar report following the 2008-2009 Gaza war was harshly critical of both Israel and Hamas. Well, a number of potential presidential hopefuls made their pitch to an influential evangelical audience this weekend. As David Brody reports, they took their message to the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority conference right here in Washington, D.C.
The goal of this weekend's strategy session, win back the White House and keep the majority. With more than 1 million members, the Faith and Freedom Coalition knows it will need more evangelical soldiers to join the fight. Despite high turnout in the past, CEO Ralph Reed says the GOP must do its part too.
We're not the Republican Party at prayer. We're not a super PAC for a future nominee. That's not us. We're a faith-based organization that registers, mobilizes, and turns out Christian voters. And we do our job, and we do it very well, thank you very much. What we cannot do is we can't do the job of the candidate.
And more than a dozen potential candidates came here hammering issues near and dear to their audience. Rand Paul talked to CBN News about balancing liberty and virtue.
Just being free is not enough. And in fact, if you are free and you have all of your liberty, if you have no structure to your life, if you have no tradition, if you have no faith to sort of be the underpinnings of society, that it really may not work.
Ted Cruz also made a prediction.
I believe 2016 will be the religious liberty election. In fact, just this week, I think the EPA has named religious liberty an endangered species.
The key for these speakers is to make a good impression that will stay with voters.
They've all given good speeches. I've heard Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, Ben Carson.
There are so many presidential candidates out there, it really is hard to keep track. But there is one person that showed up here that isn't a presidential candidate just yet, but he's getting ready and he's attracting a lot of buzz. It's Ohio Governor John Kasich. He brings a strong resume, a popular governor with a successful record from a key swing state who likes talking about his Christian faith. What's the calling card? What is it about you that could potentially differentiate
Well, it's
yourself?
experience and record. I mean, amateur hour is over. It's not about tell me, it's about show me. And I think it's time that we're able to support somebody that has a solid record of accomplishment, because that's what we need in America. No more on-the-job training.
Kasich surely won't be the last to jump in. 3 governors, Chris Christie, Scott Walker, and Bobby Jindal, are set to make moves in the next few weeks. It will then be up to primary voters to trim this standing room only field into one standout candidate that they believe can put the GOP on the road to success. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, David. Pat, a pretty big crowd there this weekend.
Well, I said at the beginning of this thing that the dream ticket would be Jeb Bush for president and John Kasich as vice president. But Kasich was head of the House Budget Committee. He's expert on budget matters, and he's been a superb governor of one of the biggest states in the nation, and one that has had Democrat majorities along the way. And he's gotten together with the unions, he's gotten together with Democrats and Republicans, and he's done is what he said, amateur hour is over. We've got amateur hour in the White House right now. It's what happens when you put in somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. So without question, a governor is better qualified to run this gigantic enterprise called the United States government than somebody who comes out of the legislative branch. There is no question about it, and there are many governors right now who are running. So you've got the former governor of Texas, and you've got the former governor of Florida, and now you have the sitting governor of Ohio, you have the governor of Wisconsin, and you have the governor of New Jersey. So we have a number of governors as well as some very distinguished senators. So
with his history and his success record, why would you not flip that and have Kasich run for president with Jeb as his vice president?
He would be a very good first, I don't know whether he'll have the money. I mean, Jeb will have the money and the momentum going in. But either one of them would make a superb president. They really would. But hey, it's too early to tell. They're still out there fighting. But I think Kasich has the common touch. He speaks to the blue-collar workers of Ohio and the nation. And, there's no way you're going to pin what they did with Mitt Romney, that he's some out-of-touch plutocrat. He's just not. He's just, you know.
He's got a certain toughness that I think appeals to people, too.
He's a good guy. And his mother used to watch the 700 Club. That's what's so important about him.
What other news do we need?
What else would you possibly need as a candidate?